Welcome to the Abundance Workshops. I am Aisha McGowan, a professional cyclist for Live Racing Tech Find, and also the founder and program director of A Quick Brown Fox. A Quick Brown Fox works to build space and create opportunities for Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color to thrive in cycling and in the outdoors. Through programs, content, and initiatives, we continue to show how truly we believe that representation matters. Today, we are presenting Leveraging Your Talents to Address Community Needs, led by Sheila Mahadevan. This year, the Abundance Project is ecstatic to be a beneficiary of a Bronco Wild Fund grant and to help further its mission to build a legacy of access to the outdoors. Bronco Wild Fund has teamed up with like-minded collaborators, agencies, organizations, and everyday heroes devoted to keeping the great outdoors great. A portion of the profits from every Bronco sold goes directly to Bronco Wild Fund collaborator initiatives like this one. Thanks so much to Bronco Wild Fund for helping us present the Abundance Workshops in 2023. Give a warm welcome to Sheila Mahadevan and enjoy this presentation of Leveraging Your Talents to Address Community Needs.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. And thank you to Aisha for that warm introduction. My name is Sheila Mahadevan, and I live in Washington, D.C. I have been cycling in D.C. for over a decade. And in that time period, I have experienced a lot that the cycling community has to offer. I've commuted by bike. I've raced in multiple disciplines. I've led group rides, and I've been dropped from group rides. I've also organized several races, and I worked as a bike messenger. I've done a lot. And in 2020, I started a community building project called Melanin Base Miles. And my goal with Melanin Base Miles was to help bring greater racial diversity to my local gravel cycling scene. Since then, Melanin Base Miles, which I'll refer to as MBM in this presentation, MBM has administered 2 BIPOC gravel scholarship programs, which has benefited 20 riders. We formed a BIPOC gravel racing team with 12 members. And most recently, we formed a nonprofit corporation and have a 501c3 application pending with the IRS. I now serve as the chair of the board of directors for Melanin Base Miles Incorporated, and I manage our gravel cycling team. I will say that I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I embarked on this endeavor. I had no directly related experience, or so I thought, and this gave me a lot of anxiety and caused me to suffer from imposter syndrome. I felt like I was making things up as I went along, and I felt like I was adhering to the slogan, fake it till you make it. But I made it. And I can say with confidence that I belong here in this space and that I was the right person for this job. Because I have managed and I continue to manage projects, a team, and now a corporation, and I had never done anything like this before, I wanted to participate in this workshop so that I could impart some knowledge on the listeners. At the end of this talk, if anybody wants to share any ideas that they have about community cycling projects, I'd love to hear about them, and I'd love to answer any questions that you might have. My goal with this workshop is to provide guidance and pointers to any cyclist who is interested in starting a community cycling project. That project could be a program aimed at increasing diverse ridership in your community. It could be the formation of a new group ride, or it could be starting a new cycling club. The tips that I'm going to provide you today can apply to any community cycling project. And those are just some examples because they're some of the most common examples you'll see. Before we delve into this, I do want to tell you a little bit more about myself and my work ethic. I'm a lawyer professionally, and my work requires a high level of attention to detail, the ability to manage multiple projects at once, and the ability to meet crucial deadlines that have a big impact on my clients. Additionally, my work requires a high level of integrity, and that is something that is really important to me, both in my professional life and in my personal life. And at one point in my career, a supervisor told me that I was not good at project management. And that actually really hurt. But the truth is that I am good at it, and I see success in my endeavors. And that's especially when I'm committed to them and I have the right resources at my disposal. And I say this to tell you that you can do this too. With the right amount of effort and the right tools, you too can effectuate change in your community. And I mentioned my positive attributes, such as being detail-oriented and having a high level of integrity, because we each have our own unique ways in which we go about doing things. We have unique characteristics that make us who we are. So say, for example, your friends tell you that you're a really good listener. Well, being a good listener is a great skill to have if you're going to build community, because you may be out on a ride and you may hear someone say, hey, I wish we had more group rides for advanced women cyclists. And if you're a Cat 3 racer and you have the desire to make changes in your community, by listening to people and hearing what they say, you can organize around those wishes and create the changes that you want to see. So where did the idea for melanin-based miles originate? In the unsettling summer of 2020, I was injured. I couldn't walk for several months, and I was unable to attend any of the protests that were happening in Washington, D.C. And because I've always cared about addressing inequity and addressing inequality, I saw this as an opportunity for me to get more involved in my community. And I thought about what I could do to make a positive change. And because cycling is such a huge part of my life, I decided I wanted to start a project that was aimed at increasing racial diversity in my local cycling community. I focused on gravel cycling specifically because I love gravel cycling. I love how beginner friendly it is. I love how you can ride any type of bike on a gravel ride. You can wear whatever you want, and you can ride at whatever speed. You're riding from point A to point B, checking out the scenery, the animals, the plants, enjoying the weather, and there are fewer cars. I'd also been to a number of gravel events, and I thought that they were really cool. Some of these events were like little road trips. There's camping involved. There may be like live music. Sometimes there were post-race buffets, but I didn't see a lot of melanated riders at these events. In truth, like at some of these events, there would maybe be one other Black person, maybe there was one other Asian person, and me, but that was it. And I know that a situation like that invokes a lot of feelings in anyone who's listening to this. That, you know, it's really lonely being the only melanated rider at an event. It also can give you a lot of anxiety. But on the other side of that is there's this joy that I was experiencing that I felt really needed to be shared with other people. So here, I want to emphasize that the project that I set out on was aimed at increasing racial diversity in my local gravel cycling community. This is specifically the scope of what I set out to do. So today I'm going to focus on how you can use project management principles to build and execute a community cycling project. And there are a number of reasons why individuals, teams, or organizations will use project management principles. To start, your entire project will run smoothly if you use these proven principles. You and your team, if you have one, can focus on the work that matters without distractions to meet your intended goals. Additionally, if you project manage, your project, and ultimately you, will have a greater chance of success. You become more likely to execute your project on time, And you've probably heard of people saying meeting deliverables. That's what that means, getting your project done on time. You'll execute it within budget. And no matter what your project is, no matter how small, you should always have a budget. And then you can also execute your project to a high standard. So the first step in project management is project initiation. This is the step where you define the scope of your project. I mentioned before that when I started Melanin Base Miles, my goal was to increase racial diversity in my local gravel cycling community. This was and remains my mission, and all of the projects that I execute fall within this mission. Defining your mission and your scope is so important. Oftentimes on this journey, you'll be faced with difficult questions. And when you are, as I often do, I recommend revisiting your mission and your project scope, because oftentimes the guidance that you need and the answers you're looking for lie within your mission. That can guide you throughout your journey. And unless you're making a concerted effort to expand your scope, stick within it, stick within the scope. When people ask me if my organization wants to help with trail building days, I say no, because it falls outside the scope. And at some point last year, somebody asked me if my organization wanted to help with a cyclocross clinic. No, it falls outside the scope. We have so many other activities that we're working on. And by limiting our scope, we establish boundaries, and that helps us successfully meet our goals. In addition to defining your project scope, you also want to create an overview of your project. Think about what resources are involved, the time it will take, the goals you want to meet, and what your budget is. Professionals will use a document called a project initiation document, a PID. You can Google this. And I don't think this is necessary unless you have a really large project that requires that you memorialize it. But you can, if you want to create a project initiation document or something much simpler than that, you can do it in a note on your phone, you can do it on a piece of paper, you can draft an email to yourself, whatever works for you. The first project that we launched for MBM was a program to help 10 BIPOC athletes attend their first local gravel race. It was announced in the winter of 2021, and the race was in the summer of 2021. So we have a timeline of 4 to 5 months. I wanted to give each rider a cash stipend and free entry into this race. I needed to get the race entries, fundraise for the stipend, advertise for the program, select program participants, and help them prepare for their race. This was my project scope. It fell within my mission. Get more BIPOC folks on bikes. And I did this by myself without sponsors. I was able to do it effectively because I properly managed the project. So the next step in project management is to plan your project out. This is the step where you'll define your key project milestones and their associated dates and deadlines, including the date by which the project is to be completed. In my scholarship program example, the project was complete on the weekend of the race, and I needed to plan backwards from there. With each and every project we have for Melanin Base Miles, whether it's a scholarship program, applications to join our team kit orders, I always plan backwards. What is the project's deadline? What are the project milestones, and how long will they take? Project timing has to be very intentional. And whether you're working on a project alone or with a team, always add a buffer into your timeline. By doing so, you allow space to handle unforeseen challenges. And also, whether you're working alone or working with other people, it allows for the inevitable procrastination and project avoidance. We all have that friend who is always late to dinner. And when we tell them what time dinner is, we add a buffer. This is the same thing. The community cycling project that you've likely identified is something that you're doing as an extracurricular activity. You're likely volunteering your time to make a positive change in your community because you deeply care. You're probably also really ambitious and assertive, and maybe also a bit idealistic. These are qualities that I possess as well. And not everyone on your team or involved in your project is going to take it as seriously as you do. So if something takes 1 week, you should tell people and budget into your project plan 1.5 to 2 weeks. You should overestimate because of unforeseen issues that may come up, and because frankly, people love blowing deadlines. For each project milestone, outline the deliverable, decide who the key players or stakeholders are, select team members to execute that milestone depending on their skills and experience, estimate resources, and decide what activities need to occur. Any instructions you give out need to be really clear. Tell people what you mean, what they need to do, how they're going to do it, and when they need to do it by. If you don't give people a deadline, they won't do things. Again, you have to really stay on top of people, tell them exactly what it needs to be done. So what did the project planning for the Melanin Bay Smiles Scholarship Program look like? To start, a local race director gifted me 10 free registrations to her gravel race, which was pretty amazing. The race was in late July, and I knew that I wanted to take those 10 athletes on a few gravel rides in preparation for the event. I also knew that I wanted to do a Zoom call with them before the rides so that we could make introductions. I could introduce them to the race director, talk about the race, and help them prepare and plan a little bit. So I decided that Zoom should take place in early May, and that we would start the rides in late May, giving us 2 months to go on those rides, giving rise to any bad weather that may happen. So late May to late July, 2 months as a riding period and a training period. This meant that I needed to notify the program selectees by late April or early May. And because I knew I could review the applications quickly, I gave myself 1 week to do that. But in addition, I needed to give folks 1 month to apply. I also needed to give myself time to prepare that application. And I also needed to give myself time to advertise. So you see where I'm going with this in the backwards planning of each milestone and step in the project. And for each of these milestones, I had to identify what resources I was going to need or what I was going to use. Was I going to use Instagram or Facebook? The application was on Google Forms. The fundraising was on GoFundMe. And for any new community-based project, getting the word out initially is certainly an undertaking. That's something I did on Instagram. And there isn't enough time today to talk about the world of social media. But what I will say is that people who are influencers, storytellers, artists, content creators, they do a lot of concerted work to tell those stories and to put that information out there. There's a lot of resources that are available to anybody who's interested in them on how to create good social media content. And the one piece of advice I would use is to plan your social media content in advance so that you're giving yourself enough time to get the right photos or the right videos and create the right story to go along with them. Social media management is certainly a lot of work. So the next 2 steps in project management happen simultaneously. Step 3 is project execution, and then step 4 is monitoring and controlling a project. So as you execute a project and you move through your timeline from milestone to milestone, carrying out the details of that project, you will also need to manage the flow of work. There will be unforeseen issues that come up, and you will need to manage those issues, recommend changes, and suggest corrective action. You'll also need to check in with yourself and your project team if you have one. And at any point, ask yourself, where are we right now and where should we be? If mid-April approaches for the scholarship program and the program application is not live, well, then I'm behind by an entire month, and it's too late at that point to sound the alarm. So checking in periodically will ensure that you see those issues that are happening, because delays will always happen. So if you check in regularly, you will see those issues and you can get on top of them. When activity volume is high, I recommend setting aside time on a regular basis to work and complete tasks. And an example that I'll give is when things are really busy for Melanin Base Miles, that's typically in the fall. So typically at the end of the year and then going into the start of the new calendar year, that's when things are really busy with the team slowing down and ramping up, and same thing with sponsorships. So during that time period, I have to set aside time every single day to work on either organization or team tasks. And sometimes it's setting aside 1 to 2 hours a day or 5 to 10 hours a week, because this is a lot of work. And there are so many ways that you could stay on top of a project. I use calendar reminders, which are probably old school. I'm constantly texting my teammates and saying things like, hey, are we on track for X, Y, and Z this week? If you let people drop the ball, they will. Everyone will tell you that they're busy, and aren't we all busy? But you just have to politely find ways to remind people of things, check on the status of things, and know that everybody responds differently. Everybody learns differently, engages differently. And one of the individuals that my team works with has ADHD, and this has presented to me a unique situation where I've had to learn about how folks with ADHD can tend to block certain tasks out of their workflow, and I've had to learn how to engage with that individual in a different way. So everybody is different. Everybody's learning styles and work styles are different, and what works for one person will not work for another person. So the last step is the closing of your project. That's the final step. But what I will say is any project ever really finished? Because if you're ambitious, you'll finish your first project and then already have ideas for your second one. But remember to stay within your mission. At the end of a project like the scholarship program, it's really good to reflect and debrief, not just with the project team, but also with the stakeholders who are involved. So reaching out to a race director and program participants is a really great idea. Ask them what went well. Ask them if they were to do this in the future, what they would like to see done differently. And remember to keep the conversation positive. It's also helpful for you to think about what went well, what you could have done differently, what you could have done better. And not just with regards to the execution of your project, but in terms of meeting your objective. So in initiating a scholarship program, if the objective is to bring more racial diversity to a particular cycling community, think about some of the things that you may not have thought of. What are some other avenues and approaches that you could have taken to better meet that goal? So in summary, on project management, I know it's the most fascinating topic out there, but the first stage is to initiate your project. That's where you define the scope of your project and create an overview. That overview should include the resources that are involved, the time it's going to take, what your goals are, and just a general budget. You can use a project initiation document. I've never used one of those. I use things that are much less formal. I keep track of a lot of things in my head, which I probably shouldn't do. But I also use the notepad on my phone a lot. And I make a lot of reminders in my calendar. The second step is project planning. This is where you plan out your project. What is the deadline, the final deadline, or the end date? And what are the milestones? How long will each of them take? Definitely work backwards and make sure you add additional time for unforeseen issues and to deal with procrastination. The timing should be really intentional, and you should definitely spend a good amount of time going through each of those steps. Next, you'll execute your project and simultaneously manage it, monitor and control it. While the project is being executed, you as the project lead need to stay on top of things and also stay on top of the folks who are involved in your project. That can include your team members, that can also include stakeholders. You also want to make sure steps are being handled accordingly. And then you need to manage anything unforeseen that comes up and take a corrective action. With regards to managing stakeholders, I say this as a lawyer who has a corporate background. Working with folks in the cycling community, their attention to deadlines is not the same as it is in the corporate world. So one of the things you really have to do is find creative ways to communicate with people in the cycling industry and make sure that they adhere to the deadlines that you've set for your project. That can be an interesting challenge. And then, of course, at the end, when the project is done, that's a really good time to reflect on what you've done. Think about what went well and what lessons there are. What takeaways are there, and what could you do to build upon what you've done in your community in the future? And also make sure you take some time for yourself before you embark on your next project. Since I went through that a little quickly, I came up with some additional tips that I have for some specifics that may come up as you're executing your project. I cannot give you any financial or tax advice or legal advice, but the one financial best practice I would mention is that if your project or your organization is receiving money and has any expenditures, keep a ledger. That ledger does not have to be anything fancy. You don't need to buy any software for that, especially if you're working with smaller amounts of money. I use Excel and more specifically Google Sheets. It's not technical at all. I just have a Google Sheet that I use for all of our finances for Melanin Base Miles. And what I have in there is an entry for each financial transaction, the date, the amount, whether it was money that we received or money that we spent, and then any information that I may need to reference later on to help me identify what that transaction is. And at any given time, I should know, and I do know, how much money my organization has. And with each project, I'll always, at the onset of a project, think about, are we going to be receiving any money for this project, and what money will we be spending? And I always want to make sure that our organization's budget can accommodate that project. In terms of like how often you should update your ledger, if the transactions happen frequently, then you should be updating it more frequently. But if you only have a couple of transactions a month and you're pretty good at remembering those things, maybe update it once a month. But if there are frequent transactions happening in like PayPal or Venmo, then you really want to be updating your ledger on a more frequent basis. Social media tips, I covered a little bit. There's so much social media content out there. There are lots of guides and really great apps that can help with social media. I do not consider myself to be an expert at social media in any way. But I know that Canva is a really popular app that social media content creators and artists like to use. I like some of the apps that create cool layouts, and I also like the ones that help you put text over images. And the one thing I would say about images, if you use other people's images, please ask them for permission and give them credit for their work. Definitely seen some folks get in trouble for that. And then for connections and networking, making connections and networking is a work of art. And it's a little bit daunting at first, but over time, I've noticed that I have gotten better at it. And I will say that making connections within the cycling community can be really difficult. At least it has been for me. Some connections were easier for me to make than others. Making connections locally in some ways is easier than making connections with like athletes or companies that are operating on a national or international level, because organizations and individuals in your local community, they can see you face to face, and then they can see the impact that you're having locally. So like working with a local business such as a shop or a team or maybe a local pro rider, what I've seen is that the folks locally, like if they see that you're making these positive changes, they really want to get on board. Especially folks that have been around for a long time who have failed to be involved in any sort of like social causes to make cycling more accessible or more welcoming. A lot of folks locally, they want to be involved in those things, but they don't really know how. So they'll see the work that you're doing. And oftentimes, if you reach out to them, it'll be very well received. Making connections with large companies, international companies, that can be really tough. Their marketing budgets are small. And recently their marketing budgets have been slashed. I'm sure you've noticed that some of the ambassadors have been cut. A lot of like marketing programs have been cut. So what I've done for making connections with larger companies is when I go to events, especially large events, there will be an expo. I usually find companies that I'm interested in talking to, and if I have a moment and the right marketing people are available, I go and I make my 5-minute pitch to them, and I see how it's received. If they if the pitch is well received, I'll reach out to them after the event and go from there. I will say that there are companies that have left me on red. There have been companies that have been stringing me along for months. But then I've made connections with companies that if it wasn't for their assistance, I wouldn't be here talking to you today, because my organization would not have had the success that it's had. So there are some extreme highs and lows that are involved in trying to get sponsorships and get ambassadorship deals, whether they're for yourself or for your organization. There is a bit of rejection, and it can be hard to face given how hard you're working to try and advance your cause and this cause for other individuals. Just you have to focus on the positive outcomes, and just know that everybody is experiencing those same things. So that is what I have, and I think that we could open it up to questions. You're muted, Alexa.
Of course I am. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sheila. Wow. I was thinking as you were presenting, I was like, this feels like one of the workshops I did during COVID when I was working at this nonprofit. Um, and they were through like LinkedIn. They were kind of like, you know, oh, how to project plan, or like how to write for a grant, that kind of stuff. But you made it way more fun and exciting for one. Maybe I'm biased because I'm also a cyclist, but you made it way more clear and like relatable and just straightforward. And I feel like I actually walked away with a lot of helpful
Good.
knowledge.
It's certainly not the most interesting topic, and I think that a lot of folks who are organizing and doing this work are probably already using these principles and don't know it. But there are some ways that they can be fine-tuned to help folks out, just to stay on task and to meet their deadlines more efficiently.
Yeah, I think, I think it is interesting, at least for thinking of who our community is. We've seen a lot of people from the Abundance Project, take on the mini grant and go to races. And then afterwards, they're kind of like, okay, well, now I got to go home and I'm still going to be around a population of cyclists that, a lot of them don't look like me. How can I try to bring community together where I'm from?
Yeah.
So I think this will be very helpful for folks like that who kind of have a little bit of that spark, but aren't sure where to start.
Yeah.
And seeing what you've created with Melanin Base Smiles, I'm sure that they'll be inspired to kind of take it on themselves.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, we will open it up for questions. So if anyone wants to drop a question in the chat, feel free. But Devin and I do have a few of our own questions that we would like to ask in the meantime. Devin, would you like to start?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say that I feel like I've been doing things for many years and no one's laid out the project management like timeline in the way that you have. And I'm like, oh, I've been doing some of these things and also I haven't. So I was taking notes. I appreciate that. And it is really cool to see. I feel like I've gotten to know you and kind of seen your progress. And so to see you kind of start this from scratch, like in real time in 2020 to now has been really fascinating. So I appreciate you being so open and honest about your process and
Thanks.
everything you've done. I'm curious now that you're here, right? We're in 2023. Is there something that you wish you knew before you started or anything that you might do differently now that you've got that sort of period of time to look back to see the progress that you've made? I think, of course, I know like your brain and the work that you do, you kind of set it up in a way that was structured, but yeah, just curious kind of any tips or insights you can share from the past 3 years in that vein.
I don't ever want to like negatively look back on the things that I've done. So I'm going to say that I support my work. But when I embarked on this journey, I will say that it was sort of an impulsive thing that I did. In that I never expected to be where I am now back in 2020. And so one of the things for me that has been, it's been a challenge because it's just something new, but managing a racing team is not easy. And it's one of the things that you have to take into consideration when you are building a project or a program is that, and I did mention this, not everybody's goal, not everyone who's involved with the project or the program, their goals are not the same as yours. And I have to remind myself of that like my teammates, for example, my team, we're all BIPOC racers, but the reason that I'm on the team is because I wanted to start a team and I wanted to start this movement for other people. The folks that are on my team are there to race. They're there to train and to race. And they also have other goals, but their goals are not necessarily the same as mine. Training and racing is not as important to me as that team and their successes. And that's something that I do have to remind myself of, is that we all go into things with different intentions, looking for different outcomes.
%. Yeah, I like how you frame that, of saying you don't want to look back on anything negatively, but that's real. And that perspective is huge.
Sorry, there was a saying from a football coach a couple of years ago who the team like made a play right at the end and they lost the game. And the coach said that that the team made the best decision with the information that they had at the time. And that's what I always like to tell myself, that whatever decisions we're making them with the information that we have at the time. And we have to trust the decisions that we make. And we can look back at them and say, oh, I wish I had done this differently, but that was, now I know, but when you move on with time, you know things that you didn't know then. So
I also echo that kind of with the Black Foxes. And I'm glad you said that about like acknowledging what your own goals are versus what everyone else's goals are in the group. I think I do have to remind myself sometimes that like there are 8 of us, so there is going to be a lot of diversity in terms of like even moment to moment, like day to day, month to month, feelings will change. Everybody's got different inspirations. Maybe somebody just tried out a different type of cycling that they really enjoy. They want to kind of go that route. And I'm like, dang, okay, so you're not going to be able to ride with me on this other thing. But that's okay. We can still find ways to support each other. But kind of coming back to the project management aspect, I myself have used, I don't know how many different apps to try to like organize things, to try to plan. And not even just apps, but even just like certain resources in terms of like people, like you kind of touched on, like how to, you know, taking care of one's own budget and things. If someone is to try to start their own kind of community project now, what would you say would be one of the most important tools for them to like really invest in and try to like learn and make like their go-to tool?
So I'm not the biggest tech expert. So first I want to say that I'm probably older than most of the people that are listening to this. So I'm a master's racer and I'm not like super tech savvy. But I use Google Docs a lot and it's free. It's online. And the thing that I like about Google Docs is, and I don't think that some people know this, but if you create a document in Google Docs and then you share it with people, people are always like, oh, I can't find the link. But if you go to your Google Drive, everything is there and it's so easy to access everything. So like all of the different spreadsheets that I make, all of the drafts of documents that I write, like it's all in this one place. And so for me, it's been really easy to access. But I have like my younger teammates, I know that there are certain like apps and things that they like. And one of them recently told me, they used a word that I had to Google. They said that email was chuggy. And I had to look up what that meant. And then it made me feel, I felt a little self-conscious about the fact that I sent people emails. So we have this team Slack now, and it has taken me a while to get used to it. But I think for every person, there's just going to be something that they vibe with and that they mesh with that's going to work for them. And the reason I brought up Canva is because I know that a lot of folks who do like graphics work love Canva, but I cannot figure out how to use it. Like, I feel like I try to move something and then it's like everything, all the text and the images, like they're supposed to be like stuck together and they come apart. But I'm sure that other people really like it. So I have found apps that are like simple to use that work for me.
Yeah, I kind of I feel that. I feel that very much. I think especially if like, depending on what folks are already using for like their day jobs,
Yeah.
or communicating with their own like friends and family. Sometimes that's just what they're used to. But I will say I think Google is the most like universal tool in terms of like when I've worked with sponsors or
All there.
yeah, usually they're like, oh yeah, Google's fine, it's
Mhm.
easy to like collaborate over that space.
Yeah.
And in terms of like collaboration, you did mention kind of delegating tasks to other folks in the team. I can say for me personally, I have had to grow into that kind of
Same.
role and that confidence. And I think there could be folks who might be like hyper independent and have just really hard time letting anyone else do the thing because they're like, no, it's fine. I'm just going to do it myself.
Me.
I'll do it my way because I know I can handle it and it'll get done my way. And then, of course, there's folks who are just a little bit more apprehensive, who don't know how to ask for help. Do you have any tips about kind of folks kind of finding that confidence? Or I don't know, what has worked for you with like some way to practice how you communicate with other folks?
Leading and managing is not easy. And people who've been in leadership or management positions at work, or maybe with their church or something in some other part of their personal life, like, you're always learning and evolving. I think that a good way to go about doing things is, well, for one, when you start a community project, people in your community will say, hey, I think what you're doing is really cool. Let me know if there's any way I can help you. And take note of that. So that's one place to start. Like, you have these people in your community who are going to tell you they want to help you. Some of them are just saying that to hear the sound of their own voice, but there are some people who truly do want to help you. And what I did was I made a list of who those people were, and I wrote down what I saw as their like talents or their connections or strengths. And when it came about time that I was executing the first scholarship program, two of the people that reached out to me, one of them was my mechanic, and then one of them was my coach. And well, I definitely have a job for each of you. And I asked them, because they offered, if they would come out on the rides that I was organizing, so that the mechanic could take a look at people's bikes, make sure that they were safe. And I gave him some pointers on how he could do that, like not to be mansplaining, just like, hey, I noticed, is it okay if I touch your bike? I noticed that your brakes weren't properly adjusted, or just find like a polite way, like as we're moving along, to say that. But I think that there's a delicate way that you can ask people for help, or you can give them an assignment, like asking them if they have time to do that, or would they be interested in doing something. It's just like asking someone for a favor. And most likely, the people that you're going to be interacting with in this way are probably people you've interacted with before, or you're friends with, or you've ridden with.
I feel like that resonates, because I know when I was getting started, so many folks were like, yeah, like I would love to support. And it's like, what does it actually mean? So I love that you were able to kind of jot those names down and make an assessment, and then reach out when the time came.
People love to say like, hey, I want to help, or hey,
We're like, that's really cool.
Can I connect you with this sponsor, or can I connect you with this thing? And then they have like no connection.
Yeah. Like, and that goes back to your point of like people just wanting to hear the sound of their own voice. One thing you mentioned in your presentation was you're on the board for MBM, and you're in 501c3, like sort of that status is happening or pending. How did you kind of make that decision to go 501c3 route versus LLC? Because I feel like that's something I've thought about for a while and have gone back and forth on, and a lot of community groups will kind of, fall into either camp. And just curious what your process was like for that and the decision making.
So I live in DC, and we have the largest number of attorneys per capita in the country. And 3 of my 4 board members, including myself, were lawyers, and we collectively made that decision. But the decision that we made to incorporate had to do with finances and tax liability, and protecting us from liability. And the structure of the organization was handled by one of my board members, who is a corporate attorney.
I've asked people that question, and that was by far the best answer.
Hashtag blessed.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, no, that's real. I appreciate that. Another question I have for you is, so you mentioned you had a scholarship program and that the team folks are on the team to race. How do you decide what events to go to, like to participate in, what races to do? I know you were focusing it on like the DC region, and I know I saw you at Rooted in Vermont. Yeah, how do you kind of pick the schedule? What dictates that? You mentioned like we're not doing cyclocross, so what's been the sort of deciding factor there?
Sure. So I feel that in terms of trying to increase diverse ridership, it helps for us as a team to go to events with a strong number of participants. And so that, like, if there's an event that's happening, whether it's locally or nationally, if we can get a strong showing of folks from our team there and then advertise that online and put a lot of information like social media, do a lot of like community activations while we're there, I think that that goes a long way towards like representing like physically, and then also making other people know that that's a safe event and inspiring other folks. So that's been the way that I've sort of guided those decisions. And locally, there are a lot of races. There are a number of races that we could pick from, but there are certain race directors and certain events where I feel that the race directors are committed to growing their events and growing the cycling community and have values that align with mine and our organizations. So because we like to get our entire team or as many people from the team at that event, if there's somebody, a race director in an event that I think is the appropriate event for us to go to, then I reach out to that race director and form a partnership with them. And so we have certain events every year that are team events. And then I mentioned being a good listener. One of the things that I do is when my team is together and they're all talking about different things, I'm usually listening, not to eavesdrop, but I want to hear how they feel. And so if I hear them saying, oh, I really want to go to this event next year, then a couple months from now, I'm going to reach out to them and say, how would you all feel about that being one of our team events next year? And so we have several events that are team events each year that we've picked out, or I've picked out as events that I think, again, they align with our values and they offer something interesting in terms of like racing and riding.
I feel that definitely showing up to events where you know that the directors and everybody is aligned with what you want for your team is, I think, really important. And who will support, if you've got to kind of push the envelope and advocate for folks in that space, that knowing that they will support you in that. Yeah, that's definitely important. For the future, are there any big goals that y'all have? I mean, you're going to gain 501c status, hopefully. So from there, are there any big things you can tell us y'all have planned or hope to accomplish? We can make this our manifestation space.
So I go back and I think about the mission, and when we get questions and DMs at the Instagram account. And one of the things, it's a recurring question and a recurring theme, is that there are people in our community who want open invite group rides. And I haven't gone down that path yet. It was actually originally what I wanted to do, but because of the pandemic, because for a while people weren't all vaccinated and we were still social distancing, we're in a much different space now than we were a couple of years ago. But I do think, and once we have, with having the corporation, having the corporate entity liability and things like that, I think about everything as an attorney. But having a regular open invite group ride which to some people sounds like a very small thing, like, hey, we're just going to have this group ride. But to me, I know it comes. See, I know what happens when you have an open invite group ride, which is great that anybody can show up, but there will inevitably be folks who don't have proper bikes or are very unprepared. There will be people who think that it's a race. The coffee shop ride is a race. There's a lot of dynamics you have to deal with, but I would like to have more opportunities where we could connect with the community and give folks that space that they need to ride regularly. That is what people want. People just want to get out and ride their bikes. I'd also like us to partner with other organizations and offer workshops and some clinics or coaching opportunities. But there's a lot of potential out there, and it's just the beginning. So there are some things that I'm looking at, and hopefully we can execute for next year.
Of course. Oh, that sounds awesome. Yeah, leading group rides is no small task for folks who really have intentions of making sure it's an inclusive space and it's safe and welcoming and encouraging and all those things. So it'll be a big undertaking, but you've made it this far. You've put together a whole team. I'm sure folks will get behind it and help make it happen. Well, thank you so much for your time and for presenting this a lot of very useful information to us here. I'm hoping I foresee this something that will be referenced for a long time.
Okay, good.
Even for me, I'm going to go back and I'm going to be watching little bits of it like, dang, okay, what does she say about this? So I hope other folks find it just as useful. Were you going to say something?
I was just oh, no, you go first.
No, I was going to echo what Alexa said, and I'm excited to talk shop with you more because you got some good tips, and I feel like we've had similar storylines.
I feel really inspired by what you all are doing at the Abundance Project, and I look at some of the things that you all have done. It's so comprehensive, the way that you all are helping Black and brown women in the cycling community. One of the things that I really like, and I can put this on the project management timeline, is after people graduate from your mini grant program, you continue to follow their cycling journeys and hype them up on your Instagram. And I think that is just it's cute. Like, it's just like really awesome to see. I've been watching like they're riders that I've never met them before, but I've been following their cycling journeys through your program. And I'm just like so inspired by them. And I love the way that it's not just about giving someone this opportunity at this one point in time. Like, this is really a movement that you're building. And so that's like going to the end of the project cycle and saying, like, what can we do from here, and building upon the work you've done. And I think that's really awesome.
Thank you so much for acknowledging that. We are definitely about seeing folks through all the way through, because we have seen what happens, when you just say, okay, that's it. Well, good luck. And when those grants or those scholarships end and folks don't see that support anymore, sometimes that can be detrimental. So
yeah, like, what now?
So thank you for acknowledging that. And I will put here where folks can follow you, but go ahead and let us know if there's any other places they can find you or support the program. If there's any kind of specific support you're looking for right now, aside from just staying tuned on what y'all got going on, let us know. But with that, that will close our workshop. For those who missed the live, don't worry, this will live on the YouTube channel. You'll be able to watch at any time, share with your friends. If you know of any folks who are also interested in hosting one of these workshops, please reach out. and wishing the very best to Sheila at Melanin Smiles.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye.
Sheila.
And thank you to our interpreters always
Thank you.
for doing such a great job. Thank you.